Hey, what's up? It's Jordan Valeriat here. And in this video, I want to talk a little bit about your mix bus and help you use your mix bus in the right way, in the what I believe is the best way, and also to just think about it maybe in a different way than you have before. So I was talking to someone recently, just an up-and-coming engineer who was interested in learning how to get better. And one of the things he said was that he constantly felt like his mix was just on the edge. He's just like, my mix is just on the edge all the time. And I said, like, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, I feel like if I get it to a point where it sounds okay, but if I do anything, if I change anything, or if I like automate up the bass or something like that, then the whole thing just falls apart. It's like I don't have any room to move with the mix. And it's definitely not the only time I've heard someone say something similar, just that kind of general idea of feeling just a bit out of control of the mix, like feeling like you're doing stuff, you're processing, you're making moves and decisions, and it's kind of getting where you want it to be, but at the same time, it's like you feel like you actually don't have control of the mix. And the first thing I think of when someone is talking about this type of problem is that they're probably doing too much top-down processing, and specifically probably too much on the mix bus. I find that this is more and more common these days. I mean, when I started learning how to mix, 10, 15 years ago, like no one was talking about top down. I actually don't really know where that came from. Certainly wasn't ever taught to me, so I never mixed that way. I mixed the opposite, basically bottom up. And I'll show you in a second that I have almost nothing on my mix bus when I mix. The way that I think about it and the way that I hear it and experience it when I'm mixing, when it comes to the mix bus, it's not meant to have a huge influence on the overall sound of what you're doing in the mix. But what it's supposed to do is just provide a little bit of control and a little bit of a boundary and a little bit of a box for your mix to sit in and kind of just glue it together a little bit. So what I see with people who are over processing on the mix bus, and the reason why it feels a little bit out of control and like it might fall apart, is because it will. I mean, the more bus processing you're doing, especially on a mix as a whole, the more kind of one move can affect all the other tracks, right? So if you've got like a compressor and then some EQ on your mix bus and then some sort of like, I don't know, saturation or like harmonic enhancement, and then you've got like a multi-band compressor and then like a limiter doing a whole bunch of work, then yeah, if you automate the bass up like 2 dB, well then all this chain reaction of things is going to kick in, and then it's going to like push the drums down too much or push the vocal down too much or throw something else out of whack, or like change the way that the compressor is reacting to like the kick and snare because it's like also reacting too much to the bass. Really, things like that. It just like I said, is a chain reaction where one little move can actually just kind of throw other things off balance. And I just find it a lot harder to mix that way, instead of just building the mix exactly how you want from the ground up on the individual tracks, so that by the time you get to the mix bus, it's already all there, and you should be able to bypass your entire mix bus chain and have it sound almost exactly the same, with a few small differences that I'm going to explain. And I got this little elastic here. I wish I had a bigger one, but it's the only one I could find. But you can see this little elastic. This is kind of how I think of a mix bus compressor, which is pretty much it's really the only thing I have on my mix bus is just the SSL bus compressor, doing anywhere from 2 to 4 dB of gain reduction. And what this does for me is it just provides like a bit of a squishy barrier and boundary for my mix. So again, it's like an elastic. Let's picture you're putting all these things inside the mix, which is this container here. So I could put like all my fingers in here, and the more I put in, it's stretched out a little bit, but it's still intact. It's still a barrier. There's still like everything's still inside there. And so it can get smaller and it can get bigger, and it's going to stretch and it's going to bend, but it's not going to break. It's also like, I was trying to think of another image. It's like wrestling, when they have the stretchy ropes around the wrestling ring, and they run and they kind of launch off of it, and they bend the rope back, but they still have to be within that box. That's kind of what I picture the mix bus compressor doing. So it gives you a lot of freedom, because I can build a mix and have it, sounding pretty good and pretty aggressive and slamming, but then it might have a really big outro where it's just like, man, I need to like distort the drums here and like add an extra, layer of guitars and, just make it even that much bigger. And you can actually take something that's already like pretty full and actually put more into it. And it's just going to stretch a little bit, but you're not going to lose that control. It's not going to go over the edge and your mix is not going to fall apart. So that's how I believe you should use your mix bus. So I'll show you a real life example right here. If you're interested, I'll take you anywhere. I'll buy some beer. So this is actually an old Taking Back Sunday song. I did not mix this record, but I have the multi-tracks. Long story I won't go into. And for my course members inside Pro Production System, I mixed this song on a live stream somewhat recently. So you can look at my mix bus here. I've got two plugins. The SSL comp, like I said. Then I have the Slate FGX. And literally what this is doing is only for some loudness. So it's really not doing hardly anything. I mean, if I hit on constant gain monitoring here and bypass the plugin, so you can hear it's not having a huge effect on the mix. It's just, shaving off maybe like a tiny bit of the peaks just to get the overall volume up in the mix. Turn on your speakers. It's going to get a little louder now. So what's doing the work on the mix bus? It's this compressor. So let me try and A/B this to demonstrate what I mean here. If you're interested, I'll take you anywhere. I'll buy some beer. So to me, this sounds like a pretty good mix, but it's kind of like assaulting my ears a little bit too much. Like it sounds a little bit out of control, a little bit like loud in kind of a bad way. Now I'm going to play it again and then I'm going to switch on the compressor and see if you can hear the difference and see if you can hear how it just kind of goes like from like kind of big and out there to just like, it just kind of puts on like a nice soft barrier in the best way possible on the mix. If you're interested, I'll take you anywhere. I'll buy some beat-up car. We could get out of here. I'll take you anywhere that you want to go. I'll take you anywhere that you want. So there's so many subtleties I could point out here, and I won't go on and on about this, but I'll play it again and just listen to the drums. So why don't we go to the verse here? So listen to the drums and how maybe without the compressor, they're kind of just like the transients are poking through nice and punchy, but maybe feel a bit too out there. And then you put the compressor on and it just kind of like compacts it a little bit. Most anyone, but I can't lie to you. Start at the gates and that simply won't do under artificial light. And then because those drum transients get a little more controlled and compacted, the vocal actually just sounds that much more upfront. Most anyone, but I can't lie to you. Start at the gates and that simply won't do under artificial light. And then if we go back to the chorus, without the compressor, this time listen to the guitars. They kind of like, I like to mix guitars loud. I like that sound. But if I bypass the compressor, the guitars almost come up a little too much and it's just fighting with everything. And then listen to how the guitars just drop down into place a little bit when you throw the compressor back on. And that's another example there where that lead guitar comes in. When the compressor is bypassed, it sounds like way too loud, that guitar. It like takes over the vocal and the focal point of the mix. But then with the compressor, so there's just a few examples. I talked about the drums, the guitars, the vocal, the lead guitar there, which is really just a perfect example because we have this big chorus and then we like, you've got the elastic holding it together and then we throw in like the lead guitar in there and have it pretty loud, but it just like, it doesn't just get smacked on top. It goes into the box with the squishy barrier. So everything just kind of like adjusts to fit that in there. And I can actually have some room to push that and to add those extra layers and have it kind of breathe and expand while still keeping it all glued together. I hope that you could kind of hear those things. Maybe depending on how long you've been mixing, how experienced you are, it might be easier or harder to hear what I'm talking about here. But if you're someone who's been doing a lot of mix bus processing and you're kind of feeling like your mix just sounds or feels just chaotic and you just don't feel in total control, well, then I recommend trying this approach and throwing on a simple compressor like this. Probably about, when you're about a quarter way through the mix, like once you've kind of got some really basic level set and processing, I throw this on at that point and I mix into it. I would recommend trying that. And again, just thinking of your mix bus compressor in this way. It's not meant to be like the big heavy lifting main engine of how your mix sounds. It really should just be like the final glue, the final factor that's just going to contain it and give it that nice consistent boundary and kind of box to live in and container for the mix. So that's how I think about mix bus processing. That's how I think you should think about it too. So hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you in the next one.